In 1993, the Opel Kadett E was discontinued. But that was not the end of its story. During its original production run, the Kadett had already become a truly global car. And after its formal death, it unexpectedly found a long second life in the form of the Daewoo Nexia. In the end, the last Kadett descendant was discontinued only in 2016. Today, we'll look at the secret behind that remarkable longevity. Was it rational business logic or simple corporate greed? In September 1984, the German company Opel introduced a new generation of the Kadett, known as the Kadett E. The model replaced the rapidly aging Kadett D and was intended to compete with the best-selling car in Europe at the time, the second-generation Volkswagen Golf. To challenge the founder of the class on equal terms, engineers in Rüsselsheim developed an entire family of vehicles on the GM T-body platform, offering a wide variety of body styles and engines. The lineup included 3- and 5-door hatchbacks, a station wagon, a 4-door sedan, a van, and even a convertible. The engine range was just as diverse. It started with a modest 1.3-liter engine and extended all the way to a 2-liter 16-valve unit producing 150 horsepower. And as time would show, the Kadett E turned out to be a very successful car. In 1985, it won the title of European Car of the Year, and sales of the model quickly took off. The owners of Opel, the American corporation General Motors, quickly realized what a successful car they had on their hands. The company actively used what is known as badge engineering, selling essentially the same vehicle under different brands within the same corporate group. Besides Opel, GM owned numerous other automotive brands and manufacturing facilities around the world. As a result, the successful Kadett family was destined to enter new markets across many different parts of the globe. For example, in Latin America, the Opel brand was replaced by the more familiar Chevrolet name. Starting in 1989, the Chevrolet Kadett rolled off the assembly line at GM's plant in Brazil. The differences from the German Opel version were minimal, both technically and visually. In the United Kingdom, right-hand drive versions of the Kadett were sold under the Vauxhall brand and were known as the Astra. The sedan version there was marketed under a separate name, Belmont. But the Korean chapter of the Kadett story turned out to be far more complicated and far more interesting. During the 1970s, General Motors was actively building its global network, and the South Korean market looked very promising to the Americans at the time. In 1972, GM entered the Korean automotive industry through the company Sehan Motors, and the first joint American-Korean project became the production of a licensed version of the Opel Rekord. After Sehan Motors came under the control of the Daewoo Group in 1978, the model was renamed Daewoo Royale. However, it never became truly successful, and the company's later projects also failed to achieve significant results. Production volumes were so small that many sources simply skip this early period of Daewoo's history and begin the story of the brand only in 1986. And in a way, that approach makes sense. That was the year when production of the Daewoo Le Mans began in South Korea, a model also known as the Daewoo Racer. In essence, it was still the Opel Kadett E, though with slightly different interior and exterior trim. The fenders and the shapes of the front and rear lights remained almost identical to the German original. Interestingly, the first cars actually left the factory wearing Pontiac badges. It seems that GM's management had not yet decided whether to actively develop the Daewoo brand or instead use the Korean plant to produce cars under an American name. Eventually, both brands were kept. The Korean versions of the Kadett were exported to North America under the name Pontiac Le Mans. Naturally, these cars were better equipped than the European Kadett. Vehicles destined for the United States and Canada typically came with automatic transmissions, power steering, and air conditioning, features that had long been considered standard in the North American market. At the same time, the Korean-built model was deliberately kept out of the European market so that it would not compete directly with the Opel Kadett. But in 1993, the Kadett E was finally discontinued, making way for the new Opel Astra. And it was precisely at that moment that the Korean version of the car was given a second chance. By then, Daewoo was actively searching for new markets, and now it was the Koreans who realized the potential hidden in this model. The first step the Koreans took was a small facelift of their model, trying to distance it at least slightly from its German predecessor. During this period, the story of the model became particularly confusing, as the same car was sold under different names in different markets. In Canada, for example, the Korean-built car was offered through Pontiac, Buick, and Cadillac dealers under the name Passport Optima, while in 1993, the updated Daewoo Le Mans was also sold there as the Asuna GT. Soon it became clear that a cosmetic facelift would not be enough. So in 1994, Daewoo introduced a much more heavily revised version of the car under the name Cielo. To keep costs down, the main body structure remained unchanged. The door openings, glass, and major stampings stayed the same. Designers focused mainly on redesigning the front and rear sections of the car, along with smaller details such as mirrors and door handles. Even that proved to be enough. The car looked noticeably refreshed and no longer felt like just another variation of the Kadett. Recognizing the German ancestor now required a trained eye. Inside the cabin, the changes were more modest, but buyers did not seem to mind. Daewoo Cielo offered what would later be described as the formula of more car for less money. For an affordable price, buyers got a full four-door sedan rather than a small city hatchback. And the equipment was quite decent for the budget segment at the time. Power windows, power steering, an audio system, and even air conditioning. Options that were still uncommon on many inexpensive cars of that era. By that time, most other versions of the former Kadett had already disappeared from the market, and Daewoo focused its efforts on promoting the Cielo. The Koreans were not lacking in ambition, and they decided not to limit themselves to markets in developing countries. Renaming the model Nexia, Daewoo introduced it to the European market. In many ways, this was the return of the Kadett to its historical homeland, although in a slightly altered form. In the mid-1990s, many entry-level European cars were still sold with rather modest equipment. Against that background, the Nexia looked quite appealing. The well-known Kadett engineering, but at a lower price and with a respectable list of options. Technically, the car was very similar to its German predecessor. Under the hood was a 1.5-liter engine producing 75 horsepower, a simple 8-valve unit with a traditional distributor ignition system. That was enough for the car to keep up with its classmates, which included some Škoda and Lada models that were still trying to establish themselves on the European market. However, the European career of the Nexia turned out to be short. In 1997, just 2 years after sales began, the model was withdrawn from the market and replaced by the more modern Daewoo Lanos. At the same time, the European experiment with the Nexia cannot really be called a complete failure. The most successful market turned out to be the United Kingdom, where in 1996, about 20,000 cars were sold, giving the model roughly 1% of the new car market. Still, considering the car's weak corrosion resistance and the damp British climate, it is likely that only a handful of right-hand drive Nexias have survived to this day. It would seem that everything possible had already been squeezed out of the Kadett platform, and that the car should have been sent into retirement. But GM and the Koreans thought otherwise. In 1993, the South Korean company created a joint venture with Uzbekistan called Daewoo. Just 3 years later, in 1996, production of the Daewoo Nexia began at a newly built factory. By that time, the model had already been discontinued in Korea. The main target markets were Central Asia, the Middle East, and the countries of the former Soviet Union. By the mid-1990s, a particular situation had developed across the former USSR. The quality of Lada and Moskvich cars had declined sharply, and many drivers were eager to replace them with any foreign car they could afford, whether it was a used European vehicle or an inexpensive Korean model. The Nexia had another advantage. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, large numbers of used cars entered the region, and the Opel Kadett became one of the most common foreign vehicles on the road. Because of that, Daewoo did not hide the relationship between Nexia and the Kadett. In fact, in many markets, it became one of the car's strongest selling points. As a result, the Nexia quickly became one of the most popular foreign cars in Russia, Ukraine, and other CIS countries. Still, one weakness inherited from the Opel remained: poor corrosion resistance. Few cars managed to survive several winters without rust appearing on the rear wheel arches. After the financial collapse of the Daewoo Group, the model was largely forgotten in Korea after 1997. But in Uzbekistan, its story was only beginning. The first facelift appeared in 2002, and in 2008, the company GM Uzbekistan introduced a more substantial update known as Nexia 2, featuring a redesigned interior and updated engines. Despite the aging platform, the car remained one of the most affordable and widely sold foreign models in many markets. Production finally ended in August 2016. And with that, the story of a car whose roots trace back to the 1984 Opel Kadett E finally came to an end. A platform that managed to stay in production for more than 30 years. The intended successor was the Daewoo Gentra, a rebadged version of the Chevrolet Lacetti, but it never managed to repeat the success of the Nexia. Today, in many parts of the world, you can still see both the Opel Kadett itself and its numerous Korean and Uzbek successors on the road. These cars never really became cult classics, but for millions of people, they still bring back warm memories.